Sir Edmund stood at attention in the grand throne room as King Aldric received visitors from the neighboring kingdom of Valdris. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. As the king's personal guard, Edmund had witnessed countless diplomatic meetings, but something about today felt different. The Valdris delegation was led by Master Cassius, renowned scholar whose reputation for intellectual brilliance was matched only by his arrogance. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never met a problem he couldn't solve or an opponent he couldn't outwit. "Your Majesty," Cassius said with a bow that seemed more mocking than respectful, "I come bearing a proposal that could benefit both our kingdoms greatly." King Aldric leaned forward in his throne, intrigued. "Speak freely, Master Cassius. What do you have in mind?" Cassius smiled, but there was something cold in his expression. "As you know, there has been a boundary dispute between our lands for generations. The fertile valley of Thornwick has been claimed by both kingdoms, leading to countless arguments and near conflicts. Edmund knew the valley well. It was rich farmland that could feed thousands of people, and its ownership had been a source of tension for decades. Many good men had died in skirmishes over those fields. "I propose we settle this matter once and for all," Cassius continued, "not through warfare, but through a test of wisdom, challenge of intellect, that will demonstrate which kingdom truly deserves to claim the valley." The king's advisors whispered among themselves, clearly uncertain about this unusual proposal. Edmund watched their faces carefully, reading the concern in their expressions. "What manner of test do you have in mind?" King Aldric asked. Sass reached into his leather satchel and withdrew a small wooden box, placing it ceremoniously on the table before the throne. "A logic puzzle, Your Majesty. One that has never been solved by any scholar in Valdris, despite our kingdom's reputation for learning." Edmund felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about the way Cassius spoke that suggested this was no ordinary puzzle. The scholar's confidence seemed to absolute, as if he already knew the outcome of his proposed challenge. "The rules are simple," Cassius explained. "His kingdom will choose one representative to attempt the puzzle. Whoever solves it first wins the valley for their kingdom. If both fail, the dispute continues as before." King Aldric stroked his beard thoughtfully. "And if we refuse your challenge, then Valdris will be forced to conclude that your kingdom lacks the wisdom to govern disputed territories fairly," Cassius replied with false courtesy. "Our forces will have no choice but to secure the valley through more traditional means." The threat was clear, though diplomatically phrased. "Accept the challenge or face war." Edmund's hand unconsciously moved toward his sword hilt, but he forced himself to remain still. This was a matter for diplomacy, not steel. "Very well," the king said after a moment of consideration. "I accept your challenge. But I reserve the right to choose my kingdom's representative." Cassius bowed again. "Of course, Your Majesty. Choose anyone you wish. I will represent Valdris personally." Edmund watched as the king's eyes swept across the room, considering his options. The court contained several learned men, advisors, scribes and scholars who had served the crown for years. Any of them would be logical choices for such a challenge. "I choose Sir Edmund," the king announced. The words hit Edmund like a physical blow. He stared at his sovereign in shock, unable to process what he had just heard. He was a guard, not a scholar. His expertise lay in swordplay and military tactics, not intellectual puzzles. Cassius laughed openly. "Your Majesty, surely you jest? This man is a warrior, not a scholar. How can he possibly hope to solve a puzzle that has stumped the greatest minds in Valdris?" But King Aldric's expression remained serious. "Sir Edmund has served me faithfully for 10 years. He has shown wisdom in countless situations, and I trust his judgment completely." Edmund felt the weight of the entire court's attention upon him. Some faces showed support and encouragement, while others revealed doubt and concern. The pressure was enormous, but his oath of loyalty left him no choice but to accept. "Your Majesty," Edmund said, stepping forward, "I am honored by your confidence. But I must ask, are you certain this is wise? Perhaps Master Gregory or Chancellor Williams would be better suited for such a challenge." The king met his eyes directly. "Edmund, you have never failed me when it mattered most." "I believe in you more than you believe in yourself," Cassius opened. the wooden box and revealed its contents. Inside, nested in velvet cloth, was an intricate mechanical device made of brass and crystal. It appeared to be some sort of combination lock, but far more complex than anything Edmund had ever seen. "This is the Sphinx's riddle," Cassius explained, an ancient puzzle created by the philosophers of the Lost Empire. It requires not just logical thinking, but insight into human nature and the fundamental mysteries of existence. The device had multiple rotating rings covered in strange symbols, along with several crystal chambers that could be filled with colored liquids. Small gears and mechanisms were visible through transparent sections, suggesting that solving the puzzle would require understanding both its physical structure and its underlying logic. "Each challenger will have 1 hour to examine the puzzle and present their solution," Cassius continued. "The solution must not only unlock the device, but also explain the reasoning behind each step." Edmund approached the table slowly, his heart pounding. Up close, the puzzle was even more intimidating. The symbols were unlike anything in his experience. Not letters or numbers, but abstract designs that seemed to shift meaning as he looked at them. "The challenge will take place tomorrow at dawn," the king declared. "This gives both representatives time to prepare." As the court began to disperse, Edmund remained standing before the puzzle, trying to make sense of its complexity. He had accepted an impossible task, and the fate of thousands of people now rested on his ability to solve something that had defeated the greatest scholars of an entire kingdom. Cassius approached him with a condescending smile. "Sir Knight, I almost feel guilty about this. You seem like an honorable man, and it pains me to see you set up for such certain failure." Edmund looked up from the puzzle to meet the scholar's eyes. "Master Cassius, I may not have your education, but I've learned something in my years of service that books can't teach." "Oh, and what might that be?" "Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one, even when everyone expects something complicated." Cassius's smile faltered slightly. "We shall see, Sir Knight, we shall see." Edmund spent the evening in the castle library, surrounded by dusty books and scrolls that might contain clues about ancient puzzles and philosophical riddles. The librarian, Brother Marcus, had pulled every text related to logic, mathematics, and ancient civilizations. "Sir Edmund," Brother Marcus said, setting another stack of books on the table, "I found references to the Lost Empire in several texts. They were known for creating puzzles that tested not just intelligence, but character and moral reasoning." Edmund rubbed his tired eyes. He had been reading for hours, but the ancient symbols from the puzzle device remained as mysterious as ever. The texts described various philosophical concepts and logical frameworks, but nothing that directly explained the Sphinx's riddle. "Brother Marcus, may I ask you something?" Edmund said, looking up from a particularly dense treatise on symbolic logic, of course, Sir Edmund. "Do you think the king made a mistake choosing me for this challenge? Everyone expects me to fail, and honestly, I'm beginning to think they're right." The old librarian sat down across from Edmund, his weathered hands folding over his robes. "Sir Edmund, in my 40 years of service to this castle, I've watched many learned men come and go. Some were brilliant scholars who could recite entire libraries from memory. Others were clever politicians who could argue any position convincingly. But, Edmund prompted. "But when the castle was under siege 3 years ago, and we faced impossible odds, it wasn't the scholars or politicians who saved us. It was you and your practical wisdom that found a way to victory when all seemed lost." Edmund remembered that night. Enemy forces had surrounded the castle, and conventional military tactics had failed. But he had noticed something others had. Missed a pattern in the enemy's attack rotations that revealed a weakness. By thinking like a soldier rather than a general, he had found the solution. "Perhaps," Brother Marcus continued, "the king sees something in this puzzle that requires a different kind of mind. Not someone who overthinks, but someone who sees clearly." As the night wore on, Edmund made little progress with the books and scrolls. The academic texts were full of complex theories and abstract concepts that seemed to make the puzzle more confusing rather than clearer. Frustrated, he decided to return to the throne room where the device waited. The castle was quiet, at this late hour, with only guards on duty patrolling the corridors. Edmund made his way to the throne room. where moonlight streamed through the tall windows. Casting silver shadows across the floor, the Sphinx's riddle sat on its table like a sleeping beast, its brass surface gleaming in the pale light. Edmund approached it slowly, not to study its mechanisms this time, but simply to observe it, as he would observe an opponent before battle. The device was beautiful in its complexity, but that complexity felt deliberate, designed to intimidate and confuse. The multiple rotating rings, the crystal chambers, the visible gears, everything about it screamed that solving it would require vast knowledge and sophisticated reasoning. But what if that assumption was wrong? Edmund thought about his conversation with Cassius earlier. The scholar had been so confident, so certain of his superiority. Yet there had been something in his manner that bothered Edmund, a smugness that went beyond mere intellectual pride. Why would Cassius propose a challenge based on a puzzle that no one in his own kingdom had solved? If the greatest scholars of Valdris couldn't solve it, how did he expect to succeed? Unless Cassius already knew the solution. The thought struck Edmund like a lightning bolt. What if this wasn't a fair contest at all? What if the entire challenge was designed to humiliate King Aldrich and provide justification for seizing the disputed valley? Edmund examined the device more carefully, looking for signs of tampering or hidden mechanisms. Everything appeared authentic and untouched. But his soldier's instincts told him something wasn't right about the situation. He spent another hour studying the puzzle, not trying to solve it, but trying to understand its purpose. The symbols on the rotating rings seemed random, but patterns began to emerge when he looked at them from different angles. The crystal chambers were currently empty, but residue suggested they had once contained colored liquids. Most intriguingly, the base of the device contained what appeared to be an inscription in the same ancient script. Brother Marcus might be able to translate it, but Edmund was beginning to suspect that the real answer lay elsewhere. As dawn approached, Edmund felt no closer to solving the Sphinx's riddle through conventional means. But his military training had taught him something valuable. Sometimes the best way to defeat an enemy was to refuse to fight on their chosen ground. He returned to his quarters to prepare for the challenge, his mind working through possibilities that had nothing to do with rotating rings or colored crystals. If Cassius had set a trap, Edmund would need to find a way to turn it against him. The morning arrived gray and cloudy, the crowd gathering in the throne room to witness the intellectual duel. Noble families, court officials, and representatives from both kingdoms filled every available space. The tension was palpable as everyone waited to see whether a simple guard could match wits with a renowned scholar. King Aldrich took his place on the throne, his expression calm but his eyes revealing the anxiety he felt. The fate of the kingdoms. Claim to Thornwick Valley rested on Edmund's shoulders. And everyone in the room knew it. Cassius arrived, dressed in elaborate robes that emphasized his scholarly status. He greeted the assembled crowd with confident bows and took his position beside the puzzle device with obvious satisfaction. "Before we begin," the king announced, "let me remind everyone of the rules. Each challenger will have 1 hour to examine the puzzle and present their solution. Master Cassius, as the challenger, will go first." Edmund watched carefully as Cassius approached the Sphinx's riddle. The scholar's movements were practiced and confident, as if he had handled similar devices before. He manipulated the rotating rings with familiarity, adjusted the crystal chambers with precision, and worked through what appeared to be a predetermined sequence of steps. After exactly 53 minutes, Cassius stepped back with a triumphant smile. The device had responded to his manipulations. Lights glowed within the crystal chambers. The gears turned smoothly, and a small compartment opened to reveal a golden key. The solution, Cassius announced to the amazed crowd, lies in understanding that the symbols represent not letters or numbers, but emotional states. By arranging them in the sequence that mirrors human development from birth to wisdom, the puzzle yields its secret. The explanation was elegant and sophisticated, exactly what the crowd expected from a renowned scholar. Applause filled the throne room, and several courtiers looked sympathetically at Edmund, clearly believing his cause was hopeless. But Edmund had noticed something during Cassius's demonstration that confirmed his growing suspicions. The scholar's solution was indeed brilliant, and too perfectly rehearsed. Now it was Edmund's turn to face the impossible puzzle. And the entire kingdom waited to see what a simple guard could possibly do that a master scholar had not already accomplished. Edmund stepped forward as the crowd fell silent. Every eye in the throne room was upon him, and he could feel the weight of their expectations, or rather their lack of expectations. Most people present clearly believed he was about to embarrass himself and lose the valley for his kingdom. Cassius reset the puzzle device to its original configuration, his movements quick and efficient. As he stepped aside, he gave Edmund a look of barely concealed pity. "Your hour begins now, Sir Edmund," the king announced. Edmund approached the Sphinx's riddle slowly, his mind calm despite the enormous pressure. He had spent the night preparing, not just by studying ancient texts, but by thinking like a soldier facing an enemy ambush. Instead of immediately trying to manipulate the device, Edmund simply stood and observed it. The crowd grew restless as minutes passed without any action, but he ignored their whispers and focused on what his instincts were telling him. The device was indeed beautiful and complex, but something about it felt wrong. The wear patterns on the rotating rings didn't match what he would expect from an ancient artifact. The crystal chambers showed signs of recent use, and the brass components looked too pristine for something supposedly centuries old. "Sir Edmund," Cassius called out after 10 minutes had passed, "are you planning to actually attempt the puzzle, or are you simply hoping it will solve itself?" Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd, but Edmund paid no attention. Notice something far more important than the scholar's mockery. Reaching into his belt pouch, Edmund withdrew a small magnifying lens that he used for detailed armor inspections. He began examining the base of the device, particularly the inscription that Brother Marcus had mentioned. The ancient script was indeed there, but under magnification, Edmund could see tool marks around the edges of the carved letters. These marks were fresh, made within the last few weeks, rather than centuries ago. "Interesting," Edmund said aloud, causing the crowd to lean forward with curiosity. He continued his examination, ignoring the rotating rings and crystal chambers that had captured everyone's attention. Instead, he focused on the structural elements of the device, the joints, the mounting points, and the mechanical connections between components. After another 15 minutes, Edmund found what he was looking for. Hidden beneath the base of the device, barely visible even with his magnifying lens, was a small maker's mark. It was the symbol of Master Aldwin, craftsman from the city of Blackstone who was renowned for creating mechanical puzzles and clockwork devices. Edmund knew Master Aldwin personally. The craftsman had created several training devices for the castle guards, including complex lock mechanisms used to teach soldiers about siege warfare and infiltration techniques. "Master Cassius," Edmund said, straightening up from his examination, "this is indeed a remarkable puzzle. The craftsmanship is exceptional." Cassius's confident smile faltered slightly. "Yes, the ancient artisans were truly skilled. Now are you going to attempt a solution, or do you concede defeat?" "Oh, I have a solution," Edmund replied calmly. "But first, I'd like to share some observations about this fascinating device." "King!" Aldrich leaned forward, intrigued by Edmund's calm demeanor. The guard was clearly not behaving like someone who was stumped or defeated. "The Sphinx's riddle is indeed a marvel of engineering," Edmund continued, walking slowly around the device. "The rotating rings move with perfect precision. Crystal chambers are designed to hold exactly the right amount of liquid, and the internal mechanisms operate flawlessly." Yes, Cassius said impatiently. "The ancients were masters of their craft. What is your point?" Edmund stopped walking and faced the scholar directly. "My point, Master Cassius, is that such perfect preservation is remarkable for a device that is supposedly centuries old. Even more remarkable is how closely this design matches the style of Master Aldwin of Blackstone, whose maker's mark is clearly visible on the base." The crowd murmured in confusion, and several people craned their necks to see what Edmund was pointing to. Cassius's face had gone pale, but he maintained his composure. "Preposterous," Cassius declared. "You're grasping at straws to avoid admitting that you cannot solve the puzzle. Am I? Edmund asked. He reached into his pouch again and withdrew a small vial of clear liquid. This is a solution used to reveal hidden inks and recent engravings. Standard equipment for a guard who sometimes needs to detect forged documents. Before Cassius could object, Edmund applied a few drops of the solution to the inscription at the base of the device. Immediately, the ancient-looking text began to fade, now revealing the modern script underneath. The revealed text read, "Property of Master Aldwin. Commissioned by House Valdris, year of the Silver Moon," which was the current year, according to the Valdris calendar. The throne room erupted in shocked whispers and angry voices. The implications were clear to everyone present. The Sphinx's riddle was not an ancient artifact at all, but a modern creation designed specifically for this challenge. "Guards," King Aldrich commanded, "secure Master Cassius. It appears we have been the victims of an elaborate deception." But Cassius was not finished. "Wait," he shouted desperately. "Even if the device is modern, the challenge remains valid. Can you solve it or not?" Edmund smiled for the first time since the challenge had begun. "Actually, Master Cassius, I solved it the moment I realized what it really was." He approached the device again, but instead of manipulating the rotating rings or crystal chambers, he simply lifted the entire mechanism from its ornate base. Underneath, clearly visible now that he had removed the deceptive outer layer, was a simple wooden box with a straightforward lock. The real puzzle, Edmund explained to the amazed crowd, was not how to operate this elaborate mechanism. The real puzzle was recognizing that all the complexity was designed to hide something much simpler. He produced a standard key from his belt, the same type used for common storage boxes throughout the kingdom. It fit perfectly into the simple lock, opening the wooden box to reveal its contents. Inside was a scroll bearing the seal of Valdris. Edmund unrolled it and read aloud, "Conditional surrender document, to be enacted upon successful completion of the deception. Signed, Prince Matthias of Valdris." The crowd fell completely silent as the full scope of the plot became clear. This had never been about settling a border dispute through intellectual combat. It had been an elaborate scheme to trick the kingdom into surrendering valuable territory without a fight. "The logic puzzle," Edmund said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned throne room, was not the mechanical device at all. The puzzle was recognizing deception disguised as honor. Trickery presented as fair play and conquest hidden behind the mask of scholarship. King Aldrich rose from his throne, his face stern with royal anger. "Master Cassius, you have attempted to defraud our kingdom through deliberate deception. This constitutes an act of war." Cassius fell to his knees, his scholarly arrogance completely. "Gone, your majesty, please. I was following orders from Prince Matthias. I never wanted to deceive you, but he threatened my family if I refused." Edmund felt a moment of sympathy for the scholar, recognizing a man caught between impossible choices. But the damage to trust between the kingdoms would be severe, and the consequences would extend far beyond this single incident. "Your Majesty," Edmund said respectfully, "while Master Cassius's actions were wrong, he may also be a victim in this scheme. Perhaps mercy would serve the kingdom better than vengeance." The king looked at his faithful guard with appreciation. Even in victory, Edmund was thinking about what would best serve the kingdom's interests, rather than simply seeking punishment for those who had wronged them. "We will consider your words, Sir Edmund. But first, we must address the larger implications of this attempted deception." The revelation of the fake puzzle sent shockwaves throughout both kingdoms. Within hours, messenger birds were carrying news of the attempted deception to every corner of the realm. The implications reached far beyond a simple border dispute. This was evidence of a coordinated plan to undermine diplomatic relations and potentially provoke a war. Edmund found himself at the center of intense discussions as the king's advisors tried to understand the full scope of what had been attempted. The throne room had been cleared of spectators, leaving only the most trusted members of the court to discuss the sensitive situation. "Sir Edmund," Chancellor Williams said, studying the forged documents they had discovered, "your detection of this deception may have saved us from something much worse than losing a valley. If we had accepted defeat based on fraud, It would have set a precedent that could be exploited again and again. Master Cassius sat under guard in a corner of the room, his scholarly robes now wrinkled and his confident demeanor completely gone. He had been cooperating with the investigation, providing details about Prince Matthias's plans that painted a disturbing picture of calculated manipulation. The prince didn't expect anyone to examine the device closely, Cassius explained, his voice barely above a whisper. He believed that the complexity of the mechanism would distract from any flaws in its supposed authenticity. King Aldrich paced before his throne, his mind working through the diplomatic implications. What other kingdoms were approached with similar schemes? How widespread is this conspiracy? I don't know, Your Majesty, Cassius replied honestly. That was only told about the plan involving your kingdom. But the prince spoke as if this was part of a larger strategy to expand Valdres' territory without direct military confrontation. Edmund studied the mechanical device that had caused so much trouble. Even knowing it was a fake, he had to admit that the craftsmanship was impressive. Master Aldwin had created something that could genuinely fool most observers, at least at first glance. Your Majesty, Edmund said, we should send word to Master Aldwin immediately. If Prince Matthias commissioned this device, he may have ordered others for use against different kingdoms. Master Aldwin might have information about additional plots. King nodded approvingly. See to it, Sir Edmund. Also, prepare a detailed report on how you detected the deception. Other kingdoms should know what signs to look for if they face similar challenges. As the investigation continued, a clearer picture emerged of Prince Matthias's strategy. The plan had been elegant in its simplicity, challenged neighboring kingdoms to supposedly impossible tests. Win through prearranged deception and claim disputed territories without the cost and risk of actual warfare. The truly insidious part, Brother Marcus observed when he joined the discussion, is how this played on our desire to resolve conflicts peacefully. We wanted to believe in an honorable alternative to war, which made us vulnerable to this type of manipulation. Edmund found this insight particularly troubling. The kingdom's commitment to justice and peaceful resolution had been turned against them. It raised difficult questions about how to maintain those values while protecting against future deception. Later that afternoon, a new messenger arrived from the border regions with urgent news. 3 other kingdoms had recently been approached. With similar challenges involving ancient puzzles and intellectual contests, 2 had already accepted and lost valuable territories, while 1 had grown suspicious and declined the challenge. This confirms our worst fears, King Aldrich said grimly. We're dealing with a systematic campaign of fraud, not an isolated incident. Edmund felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders again. Successful detection of the deception had implications far beyond his own kingdom. Other realms needed to be warned, and Prince Matthias needed to be stopped before more territories were lost to his elaborate schemes. Your Majesty, Edmund said, I request permission to travel to the kingdoms that have already fallen victim to these deceptions. If we can gather evidence and coordinate our response, we might be able to reverse some of the damage. The king considered this proposal carefully. It would be dangerous, Edmund. Prince Matthias will not react well to having his schemes exposed. He may decide that direct action is preferable to continued subterfuge. That's a risk we have too. Take, Your Majesty. If we allow these fraudulent victories to stand, it will encourage similar deceptions in the future. Every kingdom will become vulnerable to clever liars with impressive props. Before the king could respond, another complication arose. A herald announced the arrival of an official delegation from Valdres, led by Prince Matthias himself. The throne room fell silent as this news sank in. The prince's sudden appearance could mean several things. Perhaps he was coming to retrieve his captured agent. Or maybe he intended to brazen out the situation by denying any knowledge of the plot. Admit them, King Aldrich commanded. Double the guard and be prepared for anything. A man capable of such elaborate deception is capable of equally elaborate violence. Edmund took his position beside the throne, his hand resting casually but ready on his sword hilt. The next few minutes would determine whether this crisis escalated into open warfare or could be resolved through diplomatic pressure. Prince Matthias entered the throne room with a full retinue of guards and advisors. He was younger than Edmund, had expected perhaps 30 years old. the bearing of a man accustomed to getting his way through charm and intelligence rather than force. Your Majesty, the prince said with a perfect diplomatic bow, I come to address the serious misunderstanding that has apparently occurred regarding yesterday's intellectual challenge. King Aldrich remained seated, his expression carefully neutral. Misunderstanding, Prince Matthias? That's an interesting way to describe attempted fraud. I assure you, Your Majesty, there has been no fraud, the prince replied smoothly. Master, Cassius was operating under my authority, but he appears to have misunderstood his instructions. The challenge was genuine, and your guard's solution was ... creative. Edmund watched the prince carefully, noting the subtle signs that betrayed his true emotions beneath the diplomatic facade. The slight tightening around his eyes, the barely perceptible tension in his shoulders. Prince Matthias was not as confident as he appeared. Your Highness, Edmund said respectfully but firmly, creative is an ingenuous way to describe exposing deliberate deception. The device was a fake, the challenge was rigged, and we have documentary evidence of your involvement. Prince. Matthias turned his attention to Edmund for the first time, studying the guard with calculating eyes. Ah, the famous Sir Edmund. Your reputation for unconventional thinking has reached even our kingdom. There was something in the prince's tone that suggested this confrontation was far from over. Edmund sensed that they were about to face an even greater test than the mechanical puzzle had presented. The prince's gambit, Prince Matthias, walked slowly around the throne room, his eyes taking in every detail of the royal court. His casual confidence in the face of exposed deception was more unsettling than any direct threat would have been.
Sir.
Edmund, the prince said, stopping directly in front of the guard, you have indeed proven yourself to be a most perceptive individual, but I wonder if you truly understand the game you have chosen to enter. King Aldrich leaned forward, his patience clearly wearing thin. This is not a game, Prince Matthias. You attempted to defraud our kingdom through deliberate lies and forgery. Master Cassius has confessed everything. Has he? The prince asked with a slight smile. He gestured toward where Cassius sat under guard. Master Cassius is indeed a brilliant scholar, but he is also a man with certain vulnerabilities that make him useful for complex operations. Adman felt a chill as the implications of those words became clear. The prince was suggesting that even Cassius's confession might be part of a larger deception. Tell me, Sir Edmund, Prince Matthias continued, when you exposed the fake puzzle, did you consider the possibility that discovering the deception was exactly what I wanted you to do? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Adman's mind raced as he tried to understand what the prince might be implying. Had the entire confrontation been orchestrated from the beginning? Your Highness, Edmund replied carefully, if you wanted the deception exposed, then you achieved your goal. But I fail to see how that benefits your kingdom's interests. Prince Matthias laughed softly. My dear guard, you assume that my kingdom's interests are limited to acquiring a single valley? But what if the stakes were much larger than you imagined? King. Aldrich rose from his throne, his hand moving to his sword. Speak plainly, Prince. What are you really after? Very well, the prince said, his diplomatic mask finally slipping away. The valley was never my true objective. I wanted to test this kingdom's defenses, both military and intellectual. I wanted to see how you would respond to deception, how quickly you would detect fraud, and most importantly, what kind of people you would choose to represent your interests. Edmund began to understand the horrifying scope of what they faced. The entire puzzle challenge had been a reconnaissance mission, designed to gather intelligence about the kingdom's capabilities and decision-making processes. You learned that we choose our champions based on character rather than credentials, King Aldrich said grimly. I hope that knowledge serves you well. Oh, it will, the prince assured him, because now I know that your kingdom's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. You trust in honor, loyalty, and fair play. Those qualities make you predictable, and predictable enemies are easily defeated. The throne room fell silent as the full implications of the prince's words sank in. This had never been about winning a valley through trickery. It had been about learning how to destroy the kingdom through more subtle means. Edmund stepped forward, soldier's instincts fully alert. Your Highness, are you declaring war? On our kingdom? War. Prince Matthias seemed genuinely amused by the question. Sir Edmund, you're thinking too conventionally. Modern conflicts aren't won through armies and sieges. They're won through information, influence, and understanding. Your enemy's psychology. The prince reached into his traveling pack and withdrew a leather portfolio. Allow me to share what yesterday's exercise taught us about your kingdom's vulnerabilities. Despite King Aldrich's gesture for him to stop, Prince Matthias opened the portfolio and began reading from detailed notes. Your king values loyalty over expertise, which means he will continue to rely on trusted individuals even when specialized knowledge might serve better. Your court places high value on honor and fair play, which makes them vulnerable to more sophisticated forms of manipulation. Edmund felt sick as he realized how thoroughly they had been analyzed and catalogued. Every choice they had made during the challenge had provided intelligence to their enemies. Most importantly, the prince continued, your kingdom's greatest asset is Sir Edmund himself, a man who sees through deception, thinks unconventionally, and enjoys complete royal trust. Eliminate him, and your defenses become far more vulnerable to future operations. The direct threat sent a surge of anger through Edmund, but he forced himself to remain calm. Losing his temper would only provide more intelligence to their enemy. Are you threatening my guard's life? King Aldrich demanded. Not at all, Your Majesty, Prince Matthias replied smoothly. I'm simply sharing observations about strategic weaknesses. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. Edmund had caught something in the prince's manner that suggested there was more to this confrontation than psychological warfare. The timing of his arrival, the confidence in his demeanor, the specific nature of his threats, it all pointed to something planned rather than improvised. Your Highness, Edmund said quietly, you've made one significant error in your analysis. Prince Matthias raised an eyebrow with interest. Oh, and what might that be? You assumed that, because I detected your first deception, I would miss your second one. Prince Matthias's confident expression flickered for just a moment. I'm afraid. I don't follow your meaning, Sir Edmund. The timing of your arrival, Edmund explained, his voice growing stronger as his certainty increased. You appeared here within hours of your plot being exposed, claiming you came to address a misunderstanding. But news of yesterday's events couldn't have reached Valdres and prompted your journey so quickly. The prince's smile became more forced. Perhaps I was already traveling in this direction for other diplomatic purposes. Perhaps Edmund agreed. Or perhaps you were already nearby because you never intended to rely solely on the puzzle deception. You have a backup plan that required your personal presence. King Aldrich watched this exchange with growing alarm. Edmund, what are you suggesting? Suggesting that yesterday's challenge was designed to fail, Edmund said, his eyes never leaving the prince. The real purpose was to get Prince Matthias and his retinue inside our castle walls under diplomatic protection. The puzzle was a distraction while they positioned themselves for their true objective. The accusation hung in the air like a sword blade. Edmund could see the calculations racing behind Prince Matthias's eyes as the man decided whether to continue the diplomatic charade or reveal his true purpose. You're quite perceptive, Sir Edmund, the prince finally admitted. It's almost perceptive enough to be dangerous. The words were barely out of his mouth when the throne room doors burst open and armed soldiers wearing Valdres colors poured in. They moved with military precision, clearly following a predetermined plan to secure key positions and control points.
Eight seize the king!
Prince Matthias commanded, dropping all pretense of diplomacy. Edmund's sword was in his hand instantly, but he was badly outnumbered and caught off guard by the sudden attack. The prince's guards moved to surround the throne while his soldiers blocked the exits, trapping the royal court inside their own throne room. This was always the plan, Prince Matthias explained as his men took control of the room. The puzzle. Challenge was theater, designed to give us legitimate reason to enter your castle with a full retinue. Your exposure of the deception was expected and even helpful. It provided justification for my personal involvement. King Aldrich remained standing beside his throne, refusing to show fear even as enemy swords surrounded him. You have violated every law of diplomatic immunity, Prince Matthias. This act of treachery will unite every neighboring kingdom against Valdres. Only if word of it spreads, the prince replied coldly. But by morning, The official story will be that bandits attacked the castle during my diplomatic visit. King Aldrich died heroically defending his throne, and Prince Matthias of Valdres barely escaped with his life to bring news of the tragedy to the world. Edmund realized with growing horror that they faced not just conquest, but complete deception on a massive scale. The prince intended to seize control of the kingdom while maintaining the fiction that he was an innocent victim of circumstances. The succession will be disputed, Edmund said, still looking for any advantage he could find. The neighboring kingdoms won't simply accept Valdres' control. Actually, they will, Prince Matthias said with satisfaction. I've been conducting similar operations throughout the region for months. By the time this is over, Valdres will control 3 kingdoms, and I will be in position to claim rightful protection over the entire territory. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Edmund began to understand that the fake puzzle had been just one small part of a much larger campaign of conquest through deception and manipulation. However, the prince continued, I find myself with an interesting dilemma. You, Sir Edmund, are exactly the type of person who could disrupt future operations if you remained alive. Your ability to see through deception makes you genuinely dangerous. To my plans, Edmund gripped his sword tighter, knowing that the next few moments would determine not just his own fate, but the fate of everyone he had sworn to protect. On the other hand, Prince Matthias said thoughtfully, a man of your talents could be extremely valuable working for the winning side. I'm prepared to offer you a choice, Sir Edmund. The offer hung in the air like poison. Edmund understood that this was the prince's final test, not of his intelligence or his fighting ability, but of his character and loyalty. Edmund looked around the throne room at the faces of people he had sworn to protect. King Aldrich stood tall, despite the swords pointed at him, his expression showing no fear. The court advisors huddled together, some praying silently while others watched Edmund with desperate hope in their eyes. Prince Matthias waited patiently for an answer, confident that he had presented an offer no rational person could refuse. Survival and power on one side, certain death on the other. It seemed like an obvious choice. Your Highness, Edmund said slowly, you've made another error in your analysis. The prince's smile faltered slightly. Oh, and what would that be? You assume that a man's loyalty can be purchased with threats or rewards, Edmund replied. But some things cannot be bought, sold, or traded away. Sir Edmund, Prince Matthias said with false patience, be reasonable. Your king is going to die regardless of your choice. Your kingdom will fall regardless of your decision. The only question is whether you die uselessly or live to serve a greater purpose. Edmund stepped forward, his sword still drawn, but pointed downward in a gesture of respect rather than threat. Your Highness, may I pose one final logic puzzle for your consideration? The request was so unexpected that Prince Matthias actually laughed. By all means, Sir Edmund. I confess myself curious about how you think logic can help you now. The puzzle is this, Edmund said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent throne room. A man builds his entire strategy on the assumption that his enemies are predictable, their honor makes them weak, and that their loyalty makes them foolish. But what happens when those very qualities become the source of their strength? Matthias frowned, sensing that this was more than an academic question. I don't follow your meaning, let me explain, Edmund said. He raised his voice so that everyone in the room could hear him clearly. You were correct that our kingdom values honor and loyalty above tactical advantage. You were also correct that this makes us predictable in certain ways. The prince nodded, still unsure where this was leading. But you failed to consider one crucial factor, Edmund continued. When people serve something greater than themselves, they become capable of actions that pure self-interest cannot achieve. Without warning, Edmund threw his sword directly at Prince Matthias, not to kill him, but to force him to dodge backward. In the same motion, he grabbed a heavy bronze candlestick from a nearby table and hurled it at the nearest window. The crash of breaking glass was the signal he had been hoping for. Throughout their conversation, he had been positioning himself near the window that faced the castle courtyard, where Captain Harrison's loyal guards were always stationed. The sound of breaking glass brought an immediate response. Harrison's men, already on alert due to the suspicious arrival of the Valdres delegation, poured through every entrance to the throne room, but Edmund's real masterstroke was psychological, not tactical. His willingness to throw away his weapon and face certain death to alert the castle defenders had a profound effect on everyone present. Master Cassius, who had been sitting quietly under guard, suddenly stood up. "I cannot be part of this," he declared. "Sir Edmund, your honor shames me for my cowardice." He grabbed a sword from one of the surprised Valdres soldiers and turned it on his former allies. The transformation was electric. Two of Prince Matthias's own guards, men who had been recruited through promises rather than genuine loyalty, threw down their weapons and stepped away from the conflict. "Seize Prince Matthias," King Aldrich commanded as the tide of battle turned decisively. The fight was brief and decisive. Outnumbered and facing opponents who fought with the strength of righteous anger, the Valdres soldiers were quickly overwhelmed. Prince Matthias found himself on his knees with Captain Harrison's sword at his throat, his elaborate plan incomplete. "Ruins, how?" he demanded, staring at Edmund in disbelief. "How did you know that breaking the window would bring help? How did you predict that my own men would turn against me?" Edmund walked over and retrieved his sword from where it had fallen. "I didn't predict any of it, Your Highness. But I trusted that doing the right thing would somehow lead to the right outcome." "That's not logic," the prince protested. "That's blind faith." "Sometimes," Edmund replied, "they're the same thing." King Aldrich stepped forward, his royal composure intact despite everything they had endured. "Prince Matthias, you have committed acts of war under the protection of diplomatic immunity. Your fate will be decided by a council of the kingdoms you have attempted to deceive." The prince's shoulders sagged as he realized the full scope of his defeat. "You have no idea what forces you've set in motion," he said bitterly. "Valdres will not accept this humiliation." "Then Valdres will learn the same lesson you have," Edmund said quietly. "Honor and loyalty are not weaknesses to be exploited. They are strengths that grow stronger when tested." In the hours that followed, the full extent of Prince Matthias's conspiracy was revealed. Messages were sent to all the kingdoms that had been targeted, sharing the evidence needed to reverse the fraudulent territorial claims. Master Cassius, redeemed by his final act of conscience, provided detailed information about the prince's network of collaborators as the sun set over the castle. Edmund stood once again in the throne room where it had all begun. The fake puzzle device sat on a side table, a reminder of how close they had come to disaster. "Sir Edmund," King Aldrich said, approaching his faithful guard, "you have saved not just our kingdom, but potentially the entire region from falling under Valdres' control. How can the crown possibly reward such service?" Edmund considered the question carefully. "Your Majesty, the greatest reward is knowing that the kingdom's values, honor, loyalty, and justice, have proven stronger than the schemes of those who would corrupt them." The king smiled. "That is a fine answer, but not sufficient. What would you have me do to commemorate this victory?" "Create a school," Edmund said without hesitation. "A place where young people can learn that intelligence without character is dangerous, and that the greatest puzzles we face are not mechanical devices, but questions of how we should treat one another." King Aldrich nodded approvingly. "It shall be done." "And what shall we call this school?" Edmund looked at the fake puzzle device one last time. "Call it the Academy of True Wisdom, Your Majesty. Because the most important lessons cannot be taught through deception, only through example." The story of the royal guard who faced an impossible logic puzzle became legend throughout the kingdom. But those who knew Edmund best understood that his greatest achievement was not solving a clever riddle, but proving that some puzzles can only be solved through courage, loyalty, and an unwavering commitment to what is right. The final answer that silenced the whole room was not a clever manipulation of gears and crystals, but a simple demonstration that true strength comes from serving something greater than oneself. It was a lesson that would echo through the kingdom for generations to come.